Okay, we are going to uh, do the steps of our photo manipulation program. This is a series of videos that you can refer back to when you're working on these on your own. We're going to go over all these steps in class. This is just an additional resource for you. I'm working in Photoshop CS6. This is the version of Photoshop that we have at the CCNY EDM labs. Everything I'm going to show you is you're going to be able to do it in any version of Photoshop that's out there, really. I'm just using, so if you're using an older version, don't worry. I'm not showing you anything that's sort of cutting edge Adobe technology. So we're going to start. File open or Command O. You will have chosen a photo in class to be your preferred photo. I'm going to work with this picture of my friend taken in Mexico. You'll notice a few things about it. It's fairly high resolution. It is RGB color, not CMYK. And it's probably also the most colorful photo I've ever taken in my life. Oaxaca, Mexico is a very colorful city. So your first image in the exercise, image 1, is just going to be the original image from the camera. So all you're going to do is save this according to our naming scheme. So File, Save As, GDC _ Project 3 _ image 1, and then _ your last name, first initial. And when you're saving JPEG options, I would save it for the highest quality whenever you can. You may also want to save it as a lossless format. I covered this a little bit in class. JPEG, if you remember, is a compressed format. It is lossy. It loses information. It's a good idea when you're working with an image to use a lossless format. Photoshop format is a lossless format. TIFF is a lossless format. I like to keep it as TIFF because it's a little bit more universal. You're not locked into the Photoshop world quite as much. So I'm going to resave this as a TIFF because I don't want to lose any information when I save it. Okay, so that's my image 1. Image 2, you want to retouch and color correct. So a few things. First thing you do is save as image 2. Do this whenever you're creating a new version. Save as the new image name first. That way you don't accidentally start saving over the old image. So now you can see up here, it's now image 2. It's at 50% RGB. I'm going to zoom in to 100%. Command minus zooms out, Command plus zooms in. You can, the Photoshop default settings take up a whole lot of screen real estate with palettes. and I have some others here, but if you start closing palettes, you start getting a little bit more room on your screen. Not so important on the big iMacs, more important if you're working on a laptop to just take advantage of all the space you can. Another very useful keyboard command is if you hold down the space bar, you get this hand, and this allows you to, if you click and drag this hand around, this allows you to move around. So instead of dealing with these scroll bars, which can be a little imprecise, you get this. So your directive for image 2 is to retouch and color correct. So retouching means a couple of things. If there's anything that's sort of wrong with the image that you would like to fix up, this is your chance. This is actually not too bad of an image. It was a sunny day. Not too much that I can find wrong, but I am going to demonstrate a few of the retouching tools anyway. Let's say I wanted to publish this in Time magazine, and I wanted the wall of this yellow building to look a little bit neater. First thing you always want to do is go to your Layers palette, Window, Layers, and copy the background. Whenever you're retouching or color correcting, it's a very good idea to work on a copy of the background. That way you can see what changes are made. If you make some mistake, you can always go back to that background. There are other tools for letting you step back, like the History palette, which is very, very useful. But I always keep a copy of the original on the background when I'm retouching a photo. Alright, so this tool that looks like a band-aid is the Spot Healing Brush tool. With pretty much every tool in Photoshop, the two bracket keys, so the right and left bracket, over on the right-hand side of your keyboard, move the size of the brush up and down. You can also generally change that up here with a slider or by entering a number. So I want to make my healing brush a reasonable size. Let's say I wanted to take out these these little features on the wall. The healing brush, just drag it over and it sort of automatically makes it go away. Now, there was a little problem on that last one. This brush works through sampling the pixels around it, and it looks like it picked up a little bit of that green there. I can try to go back in here and see if I can fix it. Yeah, I just made it worse. Undo, Command Z, is a very good friend of yours. Another useful tool is the clone stamp. This is a this is a very similar tool to the healing brush. It is, you could call it more primitive. It doesn't have as much artificial intelligence built in, or you could say that it has finer control. So here's what the clone stamp does. When you hold down Option, you choose a target, and then when you click the clone stamp, it draws from that target and clones it. Okay? So remember, my target is about over here, so it's drawing from whatever about over here. If I'm over here and doing it, it's drawing from over here. So this is very, very useful for something like this, because I can go in here where I have this little bit of green that's spilled over. I can set my target to be over here where it's healthy, solid yellow, I can go in here and clone it. Okay. All right. Not too shabby. The clone stamp is good for repeating a texture, fixing things up. You can also do some crazy things with it, like if I wanted to, say, take Richi's eye and give him a third eye in the middle of his forehead, I could do that with the clone stamp. Ta-da! And you see it cloned a little bit of his eyeglasses too. I don't want to do that, but this is something that you can do with the clone stamp. It's pretty fun. Let's see, what else? What else do I want to do? There's not a lot that's wrong in this photo, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time retouching. I might pick up a little bit of trash here on the sidewalk. The healing brush is good for that. This is, you know, a lot of the things that we tend to tune out in our everyday world can sort of look more glaring in a photograph just because space is flattened. So things like trash on the street and cracks in the walls and things like that, it can be a good idea to just clean them up, just so that you have the pure graphic focus you want. Like this little divot in the cement here, maybe I can take that out. I'm not going to try to go in and clean up every bit of brick in here. That would just be insanity, and it would also, you know, really sort of take away from the character of the building. Same with this piece of cable. I'm not going to take that away, but I might take this little thing away. And you notice I'm adjusting my brush with the healing brush to make it not much bigger than the item I'm trying to fix. And of course I got a little extra green in there again. Time to go back with the clone stamp. Maybe I'll draw from here. Okay, so that's a quick intro to the reproduction part. All right, what just happened here? I thought that was a weird screen rendering artifact for a moment. Turns out I accidentally moved the second layer on top of the first. That's why I got that sort of weird doubling for a minute. So just moved it back, and now they're back in the same place. The second part of image 2 is color correction. Color correction just means making sure the colors look accurate, making sure you can see everything in the shadows and the highlights. You can really make an image sing by color correcting it. You can also really make it look fake if you take it too far, so be careful with color correction. So there's a few ways to do this. Image, adjust, brightness and contrast. This is the simplest approach. Brightness just makes it brighter or less bright. Contrast gives you more or less contrast. And this is an example of what I mean, that you can make it look very fake and artificial very quickly with these tools. So I find really having a light touch with most of the color adjustment is a very good thing. You have a little preview box. Click it on, click it off. So brightness and contrast is a very basic one, but it's very useful too. I'm not going to use brightness and contrast. I want to do a couple of things. I want to keep the color that I have in the highlights, in the light areas of the photo. So like this red car, I think, looks pretty good. The parts of Ricci that are in light look pretty good. But I want to bring out a little bit more detail in the shadow. Like this side of the street that's in shadow, I'd like to have a little bit more detail here. I'd like to have a little bit more detail on the right side of Ricci. The side that's in shadow. So let's look at another tool here under Image Adjustments, Shadows, Highlights. This lets you control the shadows and the highlights separately. So this is what our image looked like, a little dark in the shadows. But you can add a little bit, boost up the shadows separately from the highlights. So now again, this is something that if you go too far, you can make your image look really fake really quickly. So if you boost up the shadows to the same, way too high, it looks very flat. You kind of lose all your depth. So you don't want to do that. You just want to boost it a little bit. So I'm going to do about 13 in the shadows, about 5 in the highlights. You can see, yeah, that might be too much in the shadows. I'm going to take it down to like 10. Even that might be a little bit too much still. So I can't point out enough how a light touch with these things is really helpful. I basically just want to bring out a little bit of detail so that you can see this. We're all walking on the sidewalk, and so that you can see a little bit more of his shirt and pants. So really, look, my amount that I've adjusted is very small. You do have the ability to show more detail here, a lot finer. I'm not even going to bother with that though. So that's my shadows highlights palette. Curves, image adjustment curves. This is another way just to adjust what's on in your image. So if you bring an RGB curve down, it gets a lot darker. Bring it up, it gets a lot brighter. You can also control the 3 curves separately. So if I bring up the curve, it gets a lot warmer because there's a higher proportion of red in the image. I bring down the green, things start looking, again, really fake and kind of psychedelic very quickly. I'm going to cancel this. And just go back, image adjustments, curves. Now, you'll notice I'm only showing you a few of these adjustment curves. There's a ton here. So play around with them. One of my favorites is invert. It just makes a photo negative. It can just be fun at times. Desaturate essentially makes it grayscale. A whole huge variety of tools here. I'm just showing you a few. It's a great idea to play around with them. So you can overexpose or underexpose an image. Basically, image 2 you're probably going to spend the most time on because you want to make it really sing. You want to tweak it and tweak it and tweak it until you get it to a really nice place. I'm going to go back to my curves for a second. I'm just going to boost my curves up very slightly overall. In the highlights, down a little bit in the shadows. Again, you have this preview. You can see before it was a little flat. This just brings back a little contrast. Again, very slight move makes a big difference. I saved my layers so I can turn off background copy, see my original, see what I did. Okay? Slight changes, but I think an improvement. One more I want to show you in the retouching category. So it's a very good idea when you're retouching photos to try to stay at around 100% size as much as possible. You don't want to blow it up beyond 100% unless you're doing a very specific thing to a specific area. Now, this was taken with a decent digital camera. It wasn't the best one. And you can see that there are some issues with noise and graininess. Something I find very useful for most digital photos is to use the Sharpen Unsharp mask. So this takes a sharper copy of the image and multiplies it against itself. So it's a kind of an intelligent, somewhat intelligent sharpening tool. It just does it mathematically. If, again, like all of these tools, if you do it too much, it gets really fake looking, really posterized really quickly. But I find a very good amount is about 50% sharpening, a radius of only 2 pixels. Again, if you have a higher radius, it gets very posterized. 2, maybe 1.5, depending. Your levels also sort of make a smaller change on how sharp it is. I like to set the threshold to 1 or 2. So, here is our image sharpened, here it is unsharpened. You can just notice some of the things just snap into slightly clearer focus when it's on. Alright, so that is my retouched image. I'm going to show you guys one more thing. I would still like this girl, who I imagine is on her way home from school. I'd like to just bring her out a little bit more in the image. And one of the problems is she has black dress, black hair. So her hair, her dress, her backpack are really sort of falling into the background behind. Her skin tone is almost the same as this door behind. I'd just like to make her pop out a little bit. Those of you in photography class may be familiar with the Dodge tool and the burn tool. These go back to the days of actual printing films in dark rooms where you would dodge out the light for a certain part, or you would burn in more light in a certain part while you're printing an image in the dark room. So I basically want to make her a little bit lighter compared to her background. So I'm going to go to the Dodge tool, You can set a range. I'm going to set it to midtones, exposure 50. That's pretty good. Basically go in here, click on it a bit, and you can see that it is just making her a little bit brighter. Now it's not doing much to her dress, backpack, hair. It did something to her sweater and her face and her skin. That's because I had midtones. I'm going to switch it to shadows and make it a little bit smaller. I just want to see if I can bring her hair out a little bit, just so that we can see her a little bit better, so she's not so much of a shadowy figure. There. Alright. So if we wanted the opposite, we might use the burn tool. Like if we wanted to be like, oh, I can't, his shoulder is completely burned out. It's completely blown out. I can't see any detail here in his shoulder. I might go in here with the burn tool, burn in a little bit more detail. Now, it turns out there wasn't that much there to burn in, so I'm just going to undo that. One more thing to show you guys is the history palette. This is a fantastic tool that's only in Photoshop. This is everything you've done since the last time you saved. So the last time I saved was right before I started dodging and burning, but you can go back through your history and turn things on and off. Super useful. Alright, so this is my Retouch color corrected. Again, let's just turn off the top layer. That's where I started. That's where I ended. So a lot of small differences made a more appealing image. Okay, brighter, sharper, more detail visible. So I'm going to save this. And this is my image 2. I'm going to stop this video here. I'm going to do some of the other images as separate videos.